I am here with my dear friend Samuel Heron at the beautiful St. Nectarios Shrine of St. Nectarios Greek Orthodox Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, Sam's home parish, where he is the protopsaltis and director of music. And Sam is the principal architect, principal composer, and compiler of our next book, The Divine Liturgy. Sam, thanks for talking with us today. Tell us about yourself.
I have been chanting now for 25 years. I began chanting in Nashville, Tennessee. I've been all over the country. I had spent a little time in Boston, and I ended up here about a year and a half ago. I was hired by St. Nectarios to take over the music program here. And it's really, getting this job was the culmination of my life's work. Because all of my teachers had learned the repertoire in Greek themselves and passed it down to me through Greek. And so I wanted an English version of what I had learned. And there were some things out there, but there wasn't exactly what I wanted. And so I just decided, after the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese published their new translation of the Divine Liturgy in 2016, I thought, well, I want to take this and put music to it that I would use at the Analogia. And that was really step one. And that quickly turned into a more ambitious project. Starting that process, I quickly realized I didn't fully understand composition. I had been trained in performance, and I didn't understand composition. So I was writing these pieces because I needed them in the moment, but I also was researching them while I'm writing them. I'm figuring out, what is the method? How did the classical Greek repertoire work? What was the ways that these compositions were put together, the forms? And so I had to do a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of studying, and then I would take that and immediately apply it to English. And then maybe a couple of years later, I would look at that composition and go, I didn't quite get it the first time, and would revise. So a lot of this process, I pretty much had the book finished within a couple of years, but then it was a lot of revision and throwing away old things and starting over again. And so it took me about 7 years. What is in the book has been sort of available to my friends, to people who are essentially beta testers for the material. And so it's really exciting that it will be widely available and printed in a very beautiful style. Chanting liturgies in Greek and traveling to different parishes across the country, I got a good sense of what are the necessary things I wish I had in a single book, so that I wouldn't have to be flipping through a bunch of different books. And that was really my guide. The two main publications in the Greek repertoire that I really looked to was the Divine Liturgy by a composer and compiler named Panagiotis Papas, which is a book that influenced many chanters in America, including my friend Richard.
Yep.
And then another book by the cantor Dimitrios Sourlanzis, who also wrote a really excellent liturgy book that was published in the 1990s, and 1992, I believe. And those two books were really invaluable anytime I found myself needing to chant a liturgy in Greek. I could get by with one or the other, but they both had certain things that I kind of wish they had combined them. And so I used those as my North Star to figure out what I wanted in an English version. So the represented is Gabriel Cremines, an excellent cantor and composer, Nicholas Rumas, an excellent cantor, composer, and translator. Philip Ferris, an excellent cantor and composer in Houston, Texas. You know, the chant world in America is small enough that we all know each other, we all use each other's work, and we're all communicating with each other about the work that we do. Any other Divine Liturgy book in Greek is never, or almost never, just a singular composer.
Right.
Sourlanzis, the Panagiotis Papas book, as good examples. They have compositions from all the masters throughout the centuries. Of course, in English, we don't have centuries of repertoire, but We do have about 20 years of a lot of repertoire. So I just asked them, can I use yours instead? And they very generously said yes. And so I was able to include those in my book, which really helps the book feel connected to the tradition. The fact that you're getting not just one composer and all of his own ideas, but a breadth of composers. The idea of providing music in the language of America in English is definitely not a new one. Many of the early attempts were using staff notation, simplified formulas, and then you see this start to change in the mid-2000s over the past 20 years, and there was a lot, as I mentioned, there was a lot of repertoire generated in that time, but probably the people generating the repertoire were also the only people using it for several years. And then that started to change maybe 10 years ago, where you just see this explosion of education and this explosion of learning among people wanting to learn the chant tradition in its own native form, but in English. And so this is something that Byzantine chant actually does have a long history with because of Arabic and Romanian and even Slavonic. You know, we even have a couple of manuscripts by Petros Lambadarios himself in Slavonic. And so it's something that the idea of taking the art form of Byzantine chant and applying it to a different language is several centuries old. And so English was a natural step to just apply that to English. And people are it's really taken root. And so, you know, if you're somebody who generates something like compositions, to really bring them to fruition, you need people willing to do them. And that's something that has really changed in the past 5 to 10 years. And I think that speaks to why now, as much as anything else, there's, so to speak, a market for a book like this. Whereas if I'd finished the book within a year of starting it, you know, maybe 15 of my friends would have bought it. A couple other people maybe would have bought it, and that would have been it. But now it's definitely something that I think will have a wide audience of people willing to buy this book and use it.
So if you had to think of it in terms of what's the problem that this book solves, you know, how would you phrase that in your words, and what's in it that solves that problem?
Can you do a liturgy in the Byzantine tradition in English without having to flip through a bunch of different sources, whether that's digitally, whether that's printing it off and putting it in a notebook, compiling it into a PDF, however you do it? This book solves that issue. The ability to just have one book, open it, and get through the whole liturgy and finish it and complete it without needing to check a bunch of different sources. I think when you become familiar with a base repertoire, which this book can serve as, if you go through this book cover to cover, you will have the liturgy at your disposal, and that makes the service more beautiful. The focus becomes less on just getting through it and more on the actual beautification of it. That allows the chanters and the clergy to really focus on going back and forth, and instead of just being focused on your thing, you're then dialoguing, which is the point of liturgy. The chanters serve as the dialogue of the people with the clergy back and forth, and so it allows that to happen in a way that's at a higher level, because you're focusing on higher ideals. You're not just focused on, I just got to get through this, or what's my next part, or where are we? It's just smooth all the way through. And then that will reflect in the congregation, because the liturgy, when liturgies are done in that way, it hits different, it feels different, the prayer is different. You know, it's the difference between if you say personal prayers at home, when you have never said them before and you're having to read it all the way through and you're unsure of what you're reading and maybe some of the words you say them wrong, versus maybe the 100th time you've said a prayer and you have it memorized and it just flows. And at that point, it feels, you feel closer to God, you feel closer to the saints that you're asking for their intercessions from, because you're speaking directly to them instead of reading a script. And you've internalized it. And so I think that this can help the congregation with that, to internalize the liturgy.
What can cantors do to take the next step in terms of developing their music programs with this book? What can clergy do? What can congregations do next? Sort of what's the next mountain for us to climb?
If you have a choir, if you're blessed enough to have a choir and fellow chanters that sing with you, having a base set of repertoire to learn together is really helpful. And it will allow for a group facilitation of what I mentioned in terms of developing liturgy into dialogue instead of you just reading your lines and then waiting for the clergy to finish their line so you can get to the next part because you're just focused on your own thing. And having that base set of repertoire is really how chanters communicate in the context of the base tradition, in that if I say to you, Richard, a fellow cantor, do you want to do the Hieruvikon of Petros Lampadarios in first mode? You know what that is. You know what book we can find it in. You've sung it before many times, and thus we can open and go. We don't have that in English yet. This book is hopefully a drop in the bucket of developing that, of developing a core repertoire in English, God willing, that will allow chanters in English to be able to do things. I have, for example, the cherubic hymns composed by Gabriel Cremines in this book, and that would definitely be something that I think are worthy of chanters saying, third mode, Gabriel Cremines, yes, and then everybody knows it, everybody sings it, comes out great. And this book will facilitate that, I feel, and help move the ball forward in terms of establishing a base repertoire for the English language, especially for the service that we serve the most throughout the year, the Divine Liturgy.
Is there any one thing in the book that you're really proud of, that you think to yourself, I can't believe I actually made that work, but there it is, it's in there, and I can't wait for people to see it?
The section I'm most proud of is the section of communion hymns. You know, I ended up having to essentially create a spreadsheet to make sure I got every single communion hymn written out so that people could use them. And in that process, the liturgical logic and beauty of why certain verses are sung when was illuminating and beautiful. And then getting to take that, put it in English, and compose it to the style that really touches me, the papatic style for communion hymns that you find in the classical repertoire have so many deep, meaningful musical moments that generally are either never sung in a church or are lost in the hustle and bustle of communion, but they're really stunning and gorgeous, and I think any chanter who's ever delved into it would agree with me on that.
What do you use for Psalter?
I use the Psalter as translated by Nicholas Rumas. His liturgical translation of the Psalter is, I don't want to say the only one, there are other ones that do this, but his focus was specifically a Psalter for liturgical use. And it was done by somebody who was an extraordinarily adept cantor and a phenomenal composer and a brilliant mind in this field. And it shows in his translation of the Psalter. His text, I do think, helped bring to life these compositions.
Now, it's been 8 years in bringing this book to life. The world's changed a lot in 8 years. We've gone from, you know, it being a book for you and 15 of your friends. It seems feasible that there's a market for a book like this. What's next? What's next for you? What's next for the field?
Pretty much anything you would ever need liturgically, there is an English version, and a good English version composed, but it can be hard to find in the vast, unusual communities that have whether it's Facebook groups or forums and Discord servers, different places where all these chant communities get together and communicate. And you would have to really be connected to all of them to really have access to all of the different compositions. People posting, oh, I just wrote this. It needs to be tangible. It needs to be able to be held, to be purchased and held and owned so that you can access it when you need it. And so that is definitely the next step for the field. I think we are ready to collectively really fill the void with publications. One of my passions would be to make an English language Irmologion, because the Irmologion is such a vital resource in Greek. Irmologion is your book of pattern melodies. If you don't know a pattern melody and need to learn it, the Irmologion is your source. It has all the pattern melodies for all of your prosomia, if you know what that is.
For audience members who may not be familiar with what Sam is talking about, it's the same phenomenon that you have in hymnals where you see the name of a hymn tune given. It's like when somebody composes a verse to be sung to the tune of Amazing Grace.
Yes.
Something along those lines.
Yeah, that's like an American prosomian.
Exactly.
Having one in the English language, I think, would really be invaluable.
Absolutely.
But it is a daunting task because the Irmologion is also probably has the longest. It's definitely the book we have the oldest manuscripts for, going all the way back to the 9th century. And the oldest manuscripts of the Irmologion are in Georgian, which shows they can be done in a different language. So because of that length of tradition, there's a lot of layers to it.
Yep.
And getting that into English well and accurately is a monumental task, but it's one that I would really love to help be a part of. So the fact that we've had such a growing amount of education in Byzantine chant is the reason why these books are even possible. There is a collective maturation that is happening that's reaching a critical mass. There was a turning point collectively of this idea of just even providing repertoire in English with Byzantine notation, which I think in the 90s, everybody would have been, no, why would we do that? It just wasn't even considered. And so similar to my process of writing this book, of writing things and then realizing, oh, I need to revise that. Oh, there's better ways to do this. Oh, there's better ways to approach composing in English. We collectively went through that process over the past 20 years as a community, and it's coming to fruition. There are so many good composers now writing really advanced works, English language pieces in the old notation, English language pieces in long sticharic, long papatic pieces in English whereas when we first started this process, we were essentially taking the Greek repertoire, erasing the Greek, and writing the English underneath. And so for it to have come that far, I think we've hit a point where the compositions are worthy to be published in a book. I think now is the time because of the refining of these methods. Capella Romana is definitely the influence Capella Romana has had on everything I've been talking about is incalculable. Everybody is connected to Capella Romana who does this because Capella Romana has been, in many ways, an incubator for a lot of these ideas and people. John Michael Boyer, Alexander Lingus, they recorded the English language Divine Liturgy. They recorded it, I believe, in 2004. Going that far back, they have been a part of this movement and believed in it and nurtured the people involved. And then as people like me, as I aged into and trained myself into becoming a better cantor, I was asked to sing with Capella Romana on several projects. And people like Konstantin Kokinis, who's sort of the grandfather to all of us. And
absolutely.
And because of that, for Capella to get into publishing and to be the one to publish this, it makes sense. It fits, and it's a trusted name that I trust. And so thus, it was, once they decided to go down publishing, it made sense. That brand carried over into publishing, and it was easy to say, yes, I would love to work with you. So that would be one.
Well, thank you very much, Sam. This has been a lot of fun talking. Congratulations on the book. It's really fantastic. I can't wait for everybody to actually hold it in their hands,
Yeah,
including
me too.
you.
Me too. Thank you.
Including you.
Thank you very much.